Hello, welcome once again to Lehto's Law. I'm Steve Lehto. Today I'm going to talk to you about the worst judge I've ever been in front of. The worst judge ever, in my experience. I'm an attorney in Michigan. I've been practicing law now here for 27 years. I've appeared in courts all over the great state of Michigan, state district courts, state circuit courts, and of course, federal courts. And along the line, I've encountered many judges, and some I've had issues with. You know, they ruled against me, or I didn't like their attitudes, or whatever. And I've had some good judges that I liked. I've had some judges that befriended, judges that actually swing by and say hello to, even if I wasn't in front of them on a particular day, but simply because I was in their court and I liked them. But the one judge that I've actually made a point of avoiding is the one I'm going to tell you about today. A judge named Teresa Brennan in Brighton, Michigan. If you don't believe me, Google her. You'll quickly find what I'm talking about. And here's what happened a couple of years ago. A couple of friends of mine mentioned to me that they had problems in a court in Brighton, Michigan. And Brighton is a town, I guess about 45 minutes, maybe an hour northwest of Detroit. It's a neat little town. And a couple different friends of mine mentioned, they said, yeah, have you had any cases in Brighton lately? And I said, no, why? And they said, well, there's a judge there who's just out of control. And I said, okay, what's the story? And they said, well, this is a woman judge, and she will just berate you. And she beats people up, verbally, and she treats everyone with the most utter contempt that you'll be sorry you set foot in her courtroom. And I said, why? And they go, don't know. She's out of control. And so somewhere along the line, I had someone contact me, and they needed my help in Brighton. And contrary to the advice I'd gotten from my friends who said, don't file cases in Brighton if you can avoid it, I filed a case in Brighton, and it got assigned to Judge Teresa Brennan. And I went to a pretrial conference, which is normally where you just stand up in front of the judge and both sides are there. And the judge normally would say, what's the case about? How long do you guys need? When would you like me to set it for trial? And is there any way I can help you possibly resolve the case? And so I go to court for the pretrial conference. My opposing counsel's there. And I got the opportunity to watch a few people who went before me, a few cases that went before me. And she's beating everybody up. And it's so hard to describe to people who aren't in court very often. But there's a certain decorum in the courtroom and a certain amount of respect. You show the bench respect. You treat judges with respect, but you also expect that the judges will treat you fairly and possibly with some respect as well. And I got up there and I introduced myself and my client, and opposing counsel does the same thing. And the judge starts yelling at us. And she asks me to pull the complaint out, the lawsuit out, and she starts going through it line by line. Okay, paragraph 3, what does that mean? Paragraph 4, how are you going to prove that? Paragraph 5, what does that mean? Paragraph 6, how are you going to prove paragraph 6? And there's a process in civil litigation where an opponent can look at a complaint and say, I don't think this complaint is proper. And they can bring what's called a motion for summary judgment, or summary disposition, it's called in Michigan, asking the court to rule on whether or not the complaint is sufficient to go to trial. And about halfway through the questioning by the judge, I said, Your Honor, I wasn't expecting to be arguing a motion for summary judgment this morning. And she cut me off and she's like, no, that's not what we're here, but I have the right to ask these questions. Of course she's got the right to ask the questions, but that's still a little bit odd. And so she'd fire questions at me and say, I don't know if I'm going to let you do this. And it got to be so weird. I'm like, this is crazy. But then ironically, she does the exact same thing to opposing counsel. She starts ripping apart that guy's answer. Okay, you said this. What does that mean? Well, you said this. What does that mean? And it's such an unpleasant experience that I've spoken to people and I said, does she do this in the hopes that you'll be so sick of dealing with her that maybe you'll settle your case and go away? And if the case settles, that's a good thing, right? Maybe that's what she's trying to do. But I heard so many stories about crazy things she did that I thought, okay, this is not a plan on her part. This is just the fact that she does not have the proper temperament to be a judge. And in case you think I'm just being a little bit over dramatic here, I'm not. I'm underplaying how bad it was. And I had to go in front of her more than once. And I saw her beating other people up. She beat me up. I'm talking about verbally from the bench. The most disrespected I've ever been in a courtroom. And I've had people who didn't respect me. And she put them all to shame. Okay, so just so you think I'm not making this stuff up, everything I'm now going to tell you is from mainstream media. Okay, you can Google this stuff if you think I'm exaggerating one bit. December 18th, from the Livingston Daily, which is the local newspaper, because this is all going on in Livingston County. Livingston County District Court Judge Teresa Brennan was arraigned on perjury and 2 other felony charges Tuesday morning in a Livingston County courtroom. Okay, so I was just simply talking about her demeanor on the bench. Turns out the accusations are much greater than that. And that's the interesting thing. If all I see is her on the bench for a 10 or 15-minute hearing 2 or 3 times in the period of a year because I have a case in front of her, that's nothing compared to what's going on behind the scenes. So Genesee County Judge David Gwynn ordered Brennan to surrender her passport and set bond that doesn't require payment for her to be released. Brennan was charged last week with perjury, tampering with evidence, and other common law offenses by the Michigan Attorney General's office. And here's what happens. She's also arraigned on obstruction of justice charges. The Livingston Daily reported a couple years ago that Brennan was initially under investigation by the Judicial Tenure Commission. Transcripts from depositions in her divorce from her now ex-husband, Don Root, raised questions about whether she was having an affair with a Michigan State Police detective, Sean Furlong, during a murder trial for Jerome Kowalski. So here's the story. A guy named Kowalski's on trial for murder. The judge is this judge, and she's up on the bench. The defense guy's over there. Kowalski's the defendant. He's got an attorney. And on the other side's the prosecution and Detective Sean Furlong, who's there on behalf of the people. And the allegation is that she may have been having an affair with the Michigan State Police detective who was there in a trial she was presiding over. Court documents show Brennan made 3 extended phone calls to Furlong during the Kowalski trial. In addition, records show 231 phone calls spanning over 1,000 minutes between Brennan and Furlong from November 2011 through December 2012. Furlong was the key investigator in that trial, and Kowalski was convicted. Brennan sentenced him to life, which is mandatory for first-degree murder. They've now had a bunch of hearings about whether or not Brennan should be on the bench. She's been removed from the bench, but she still technically is a judge. And State Senator Joe Hune of Fowlerville attended the hearing that they had regarding the Judicial Tenure Commission and said afterwards that Brennan needs to go. Hune called for Brennan to resign more than 6 months ago and called again for her resignation on Monday, saying citizens have had enough of her antics, but she refuses to resign. Brennan was removed from her caseload June 13th amid the Judicial Tenure Commission complaint, but continues to be paid. And by the way, it pays very, very well to be a judge in Michigan. It's a 6-figure job. So she continues to be paid while the complaint process plays out. But of course, she faces up to 15 years in prison if convicted on the perjury charge. And we'll get to the details of this in a second. But just so you know, when she's berating me in court and basically berating everyone in court and treating everyone with utter contempt, she's the one facing felony charges right now. The Michigan Attorney General's office alleges that Brennan gave false testimony regarding a cell phone that was considered a marital asset during hearings in her own divorce case. And that's another story altogether. We'll get to that in a second. And that she tampered with evidence in an official proceeding. It also said she committed misconduct by failing to recuse herself immediately from her own divorce case and used that delay to dispense of evidence. So, again, like I said, we'll explain all of this in a moment. It's very convoluted, but it's hilarious. During a Judicial Tenure Commission hearing in October, Brennan's court reporter, Felicia Millhouse, said she was asked by Brennan to look up how to delete Hotmail and Gmail accounts from a phone. The Michigan State Police Computer Crime Unit confirmed that Millhouse's work computer was used to make searches on how to deactivate and terminate a Hotmail account 2 days after a motion had been filed by her now ex-husband to preserve evidence in the divorce case, according to the charging affidavit. Amid the same commission hearing, Brennan admitted lying in a divorce deposition, stating, "I never intended on making the other attorney's job easy," and referring to the other attorney as the attorney who represented her now ex-husband. While the perjury charge is punishable by up to 15 years in prison, the charge of tampering or destroying evidence is also punishable by up to 4 years in prison, and the charge of common law offenses may be 5 years in prison. Okay, so if this plays out the way I hope it does, prison time is in her future. The resolution is pending in the House Committee on the Judiciary. If the resolution, Local state representatives have introduced a resolution in the state house in September calling for Brennan's impeachment. So in other words, she's technically still a judge. She's had her caseload removed, so now she sits at home and collects paychecks. So the legislature said, okay, we may have to impeach this person to get her off the bench. That resolution is in the House Committee on the Judiciary. If the resolution is approved by the state house, an impeachment trial would take place in the Senate, and if convicted there, Brennan would be removed from office. So there are people in Lansing who are trying to get her removed from office. And again, like I said, in 27, 28 years of practice, she's without question the worst judge I've ever been in front of. And it got to the point where, for over a year now, I've been turning down business in Brighton. If someone calls me and says, Steve, I need your help, I bought a car, it's defective, boom, 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 and they walk me through the whole process. If I say, where are you from? And they go, oh, by the way, it's in Brighton. The case will need to be filed in Brighton. I've actually turned down those cases. And I've had people say, why? And I say, do you know who Judge Brennan is? And they go, oh, yeah. I say, well, I won't go in front of her. I refuse to go in front of her. I'm sorry, I won't do that. I know that some people who watch these videos are going to be shocked to hear that I turned down business because I don't like a judge. The problem is, as an attorney, I feel the need to represent my client and get the best result for them I can that's allowed by law. If you go in front of somebody who's that out of control and unpredictable, you don't know what's going to happen. And so if I represent somebody in a situation where I don't know what's going to happen and bad things happen, it's partly my fault, especially if I knew going in it could happen. So I have to avoid that situation. So unfortunately, I turned down business. I know other attorneys who have as well. So there are attorneys in this area, if you ask them, will you file a case in Brighton? They'll say no. Will you handle a case in Brighton? Not in front of that judge. No, won't do it. And there's a reason. So the Judicial Tenure Commission is the body of people in Michigan who oversees judges. And if there's a judge on the bench who is out of control or has problems, the Judicial Tenure Commission will then step in and review the judge's performance and then make recommendations to the Supreme Court about whether or not that judge should be, remain on the bench. So the Judicial Tenure Commission decided to do an investigation, a full-blown investigation. And they assigned a guy to be what they call a special master. And the master they appointed is a guy named William Giovan. William Giovan is a retired Wayne County Circuit Court judge who I've been in front of many times. And I can tell you right now, this guy is as honest and respectable as the day is long. And I think I used that cliche a couple videos ago. I apologize. But William Giovan is one of the guys, if you said, Steve, pick a judge out there, on the bench you're retired, who you want to hear your case. You're going to trial for something important. Who do you want on the bench? I would have said, I want Giovan. I want this guy. He's that good. He's that respected. Not because he likes me. He probably doesn't even know me. I'm one of just thousands of attorneys who've appeared before him over the last 20 years before he retired. The point is, he's that honest and respected. And that's why they appointed him, the master, to oversee this. So he held hearings and he took testimony and affidavits from people, including Brennan, and he issued his special master's report. I'm looking at the master's report right here. You can get a copy of this off the internet, okay? And he says, on June 12, 2018, the Judicial Tenure Commission filed formal complaints against respondent Teresa M. Brennan, a judge of the 53rd District Court located in Brighton. The Michigan Supreme Court appointed William J. Giovan, retired circuit judge, as master on June 14th. Petitions and pretrial motions were filed, the principal result of which was that the examiner conceded that the complaint does not allege the respondent, Detective Sean Furlong, had sexual relations prior to the verdict in the trial of People versus Kowalski. So one of the big issues was whether or not the judge was having a sexual affair with the state police person during the trial. And Giovan came right out and said, no, apparently not. At least there's no evidence of it. So he makes it very, very clear that was not happening. However, the next 20 plus pages indicate there were other things happening. The first phase of the public hearing commenced in Livonia on Monday, October 1st, and ran for 8 days. So this is a very lengthy investigation, okay? Total of 16 witnesses testified, voluminous exhibits. A second amended complaint was filed, 91 pages with 397 numbered paragraphs, addressing 17 counts of alleged misconduct. And then he finds facts and conclusions of law that he issues in written form. Number 1, misconduct for respondent's failure to disqualify herself in the People versus Kowalski. Perhaps the most serious charge proven against respondent Teresa Brennan is her failure to disqualify herself from the case of People versus Kowalski. It was not only serious misconduct, but also one that infected the integrity of a serious criminal proceeding, a charge of double homicide first-degree murder that resulted in a sentence of life imprisonment without parole. He talks about how on the morning before the start of the trial, an attorney named Thomas Kaiser faxed a letter to the Livingston County prosecutor that contained allegations about inappropriate contacts between Judge Brennan and the detective. The trial prosecutor, Pamela Mass, gave the letter to defense counsel, and the two of them attended a pretrial conference that had been scheduled for that day. They had a discussion in chambers with the judge, during which they asked her about the allegations in the letter. In a long response, the judge said she was friends with the detective, but her relationship with him was strictly professional. She would see them along with others, she said, at parties, charity events, retirement parties, and the like. There's nothing to require her disqualification, she claimed. Well, among the things she did not disclose, according to the master, was that she consistently met with Furlong and another detective behind closed doors in her chambers, unlike her practice of signing warrants in the courtroom when other police personnel sought warrants. That she had met with Detective Furlong in small social groups, as well as having been to lunch and sporting events with him alone. That she sometimes gave her husband's season tickets to Furlong to use at football games. That she regularly made her cottage available to Furlong for a week's exclusive use, in addition to having Furlong as a guest at the cottage among a small group of people. That she had gone Christmas shopping with Furlong. That Furlong had been a dinner guest at her home. That the judge had purchased an airline ticket for Furlong so that he could accompany her on a trip to perform her niece's wedding. That prior to the Kowalski case being assigned to her, she had told a staff member that Furlong had persuaded her that Mr. Kowalski was guilty. That she had more than 1,500 telephone calls of a social nature with Furlong between July 2008 and the start of the Kowalski trial. Let that sink in. 1,500 telephone calls. That she was on the phone with Furlong at least 1 hour and as much as 2 hours every month between November 2001 and the start of the Kowalski trial. 80% of the calls she had initiated. That in addition to the phone calls, respondent and Furlong texted each other about 400 times from 2010 until the start of the trial. Nor did she afterward disclose it during the trial. She talked with Furlong on the phone for more than a half hour, in addition to texting back and forth with him, nor that she had another 20 phone conversations with Furlong, totaling more than 4 hours plus more texts between the verdict and the sentencing. The foregoing, and this is the special master now talking, the foregoing was more than sufficient to have required Judge Brennan's disqualification. So she should not have been the judge presiding over this murder trial. And the fact that they asked her about it and the fact that she left all that stuff out would indicate a problem. In fact, the master wrote, the relationships noted above by themselves tend to reflect as much, but there is still more compelling evidence. In 2007, Judge Brennan had a milestone birthday. Later, she told two persons that she had shared a kiss with Detective Furlong in her chambers around the time of her birthday. So the fact that she admitted to kissing the police officer in her chambers would also be something indicating some kind of relationship there that she should probably have disclosed. This story is so convoluted and so detailed, we actually have to go into extra innings. I hope you don't mind. So she admits the kiss with the police officer back in chambers, and she admits that to two of the people that she works with in the office. On April 22, 2013, 7 weeks after the Kowalski sentencing, Christy Cox went to the judge's chambers in preparation for the afternoon court proceedings and found the judge curled up in a ball in severe distress. I'm guessing she's laying on the floor in the fetal position, but he says curled up in a ball in severe distress. Another person testified that she went to the judge's chambers that day and found the judge and Detective Furlong there, both in tears. Judge Brennan told her that her distress arose from Furlong's announcement that the two of them could no longer see each other. According to both versions of the event, the other woman's and this woman's, They decided that the judge should not handle her afternoon docket and instructed the staff to cancel it and tell the public the judge had food poisoning. And so that's obviously nonsense. So what appears then is the trajectory of a romance between Judge Brennan and Detective Furlong that started sometime before her birthday in 2007 and continued at least until sometime in late 2013 when Judge Brennan says they first had sexual relations. January 4th, 2013, the date of the disqualification motion, fell at the hottest part of that trajectory. Again, I'm reading directly from the master's report. So he asks rhetorically, should Judge Brennan have agreed to disqualify herself at the time of the motion? The answer seems to be obviously yes. But as a practical matter, it was a near impossibility for her to do it at the time because a recusal in response to the motion would have acknowledged the travesty of having presided for 4 years over a criminal prosecution when she'd had a close relationship with the investigating officer in charge and principal witness. So he says, what should she have done? When the Kowalski case was first assigned to her, she could have quietly recused herself sua sponte, meaning on her own motion, with a vague reference to preserving the appearance of propriety. That would have saved us and herself a lot of trouble. The respondent's concealment of her relationship with Detective Furlong and failure to recuse herself was gross misconduct that violated several canons of the Michigan Judicial Code of Conduct. But that's not all, okay? I'm only on page 7. Delay in disqualification in order to destroy evidence. So Judge Brennan was married to Donald Root in 1990. He moved out of the marital home in 2013 and a couple days later filed for divorce. Well, because he filed for divorce in this district, that divorce case was assigned to Judge Brennan. His wife, his soon-to-be ex-wife, is assigned the case. And obviously, everyone knows you can't do that. You can't be the judge in a case in which you're a party. But the problem is that that's just how the courts work, and that, as a matter of fact, gets assigned, or a matter of routine. And then, of course, it's up to the judge to say, oh, I can't handle this, and hand it up to somebody else. Well, the case was assigned to Judge Brennan by the local rule, and Chief Circuit Judge David Reeder gave her a courtesy call to inform her of the filing. He didn't mention disqualification to her because he assumed it would obviously occur immediately to her. But no disqualification was submitted. Nor did Judge Brennan disqualify herself on Monday. That afternoon, she spoke with her attorney for 17 minutes on the phone. At 11 a.m. on Tuesday, Mr. Root's attorney, Tom Kaiser, filed a motion for entry of ex parte mutual restraining order regarding the duty to preserve evidence, which sought that the parties preserve evidence, including things about phone calls and phone records. Upon learning of the motion being filed, Judge Reeder instructed his secretary to call Judge Brennan to emphasize the immediate need for disqualification order. Because a couple days have now passed. And Ms. Pratt did call and also emailed the judge a copy of both the ex parte motion and disqualification order, telling the judge that she would travel to the Brighton court in the afternoon to pick up the executed order. They were asking her to sign the order to make it official. Ms. Pratt did go to Brighton, but Judge Brennan told her that she would not be signing the order until she spoke with her attorney. So, about 3 p.m. the next day, Judge Reeder was informed by Judge Brennan's office that the disqualification order had been signed and was in the court mail. It was not in the court mail, however, when the courier returned to Howell that afternoon. The disqualification order received in Howell on the morning of December 8th. So there was a 6-day delay for that judge to sign the disqualification order, saying that she couldn't oversee her own divorce case. And that's while an emergency motion was pending. So the judge who's overseeing this case, the master, asks a bunch of questions, and he says, the evidence commands the conclusion that her intent was stalling for time in order to obliterate the data on her phone so it would not be available as evidence against her. He's saying he thinks she did it to destroy evidence. Between the time respondent was apprised of the ex parte motion and December 8th, she asked her courtroom staff and a police officer for assistance in deleting information and an email account from her cell phone. On December 8th, she asked her court recorder, Felicia Milhouse, to try to delete the Hotmail account from the phone for her. And then that's when the Google searches came in and all that. He says, the master does, more likely than not, Judge Brennan's attempts and eventual success in obliterating the data from the cell phone rendered her guilty of a felony described at MCL 750.483A5A, which is knowingly and intentionally removing, altering, concealing, destroying, or otherwise tampering with evidence to be offered in a present or future official proceeding. And then he says Judge Brennan delayed disqualifying herself from her own court case when she should have done so immediately, and that would be conduct violating several canons of the Michigan Code of Judicial Conduct. Okay? But that's not all. She failed to disclose relationships and or to grant disqualification in cases where an attorney named Sherry Polish or her firm served as counsel. And I'm not going to get into this one, but it turns out that she was a longtime friend with an attorney, a local attorney, and they spent lots of time together, ski trips together, book clubs together, vacationing at each other's cottages and so on. And whenever somebody would ask about that relationship and, should the judge recuse herself on cases involving that judge or members of her firm, Judge Brennan refused, just said, no, there's nothing inappropriate about that. So the judge, master overseeing this tenure commission hearing says, the respondent's failure to recuse herself in cases where Ms. Polish or her firm or counsel violated canons 1, 2, 3 of the Michigan Code of Judicial Conduct. But now we're going to get to the fun part. And this is the part that everyone is familiar with. And it's not as big in terms of the crimes that are alleged in the first couple instances. But this is what all the attorneys know about. Persistent abuse of attorneys, litigants, witnesses, and employees. The evidence establishes that Judge Brennan has been consistently abusive to attorneys, litigants, and witnesses, and to her own court staff as well, as was the universal opinion of any witness who testified about the judge's demeanor. I didn't get to testify. I didn't ask to testify. But if I did, I can confirm all of this. It was almost a daily occurrence. One person said that Judge Brennan would shout, yell, or cut off attorneys during their arguments. David Kaplan, an attorney with 44 years of experience in the courts, characterized Judge Brennan as unique for having the worst demeanor of any judge before whom he'd appeared in his lengthy career. Her behavior included degrading attorneys in front of their clients when there was no necessity to do so. And I'm telling you, in 27 years, I agree with this. Now, this man's got 17 years on me, but trust me, worst judge ever. Carol Lathrop Roberts is an attorney who practiced in Livingston County for 30 years and appeared before Judge Brennan 4 or 5 dozen times, she estimated. She found respondents' courtroom behavior appalling, abusive, and routinely unpleasant, disrespectful, and intimidating to litigants and attorneys. She deemed the judge a black smear on the judiciary, and that's a quote. Bruce Sage is an attorney with 44 years of litigation experience who testified that he's been respected by all but one of the judges before whom he appeared, the exception being Judge Brennan. In his case, it's cited here because he felt he'd been mocked, demeaned, and threatened, and that case went up on appeal. And part of his appeal was he actually asked the Court of Appeals to look at what this judge is doing. And the Court of Appeals agreed with him and sent it back down. And they said, the record is replete with instances in which the judge treated defendant or her attorney, Bruce Sage, with apparent hostility. And then there's several paragraphs where they describe what happened in that case. I won't go into them here. It's crazy. But Judge Brennan was continually abusive also to her own court staff as well. Francine Zisk, employed elsewhere at the time of the hearing, had been both the chief probation officer and the court administrator at that court, serving daily under the direction of Judge Brennan. According to Ms. Zisk, every employee who worked for Judge Brennan complained about the treatment they received. Every employee. Indeed, by the year 2016 or 2017, somewhere between 17 and 21 employees actually left the court because of their treatment by Judge Brennan. At least 17 employees had left because of Judge Brennan. According to several witnesses, the judge was conspicuously and continually abusive to her secretary, court recorder Christy Cox, who herself testified to the same. She was later diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of working for Judge Brennan. I believe it. I was only in front of her for 10, 15 minutes at a time, and I felt abused. Imagine putting up with that for 40 hours a week. Okay? So, Judge Brennan's persistent abuse and discourtesy is a violation of the canons 2, 3, subparts, and so on. And again, he finds that a violation of the rules regarding judges. And then finally, no, I'm sorry, this isn't final. There's two more things. Lying under oath. You know how a judge asks you to take an oath? Judge will tell you to raise your right hand and swear, and then the judge will give you the oath where you promise to tell the court the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God. Guess what Judge Brennan did when she was under oath? Lying under oath. The scope of Judge Brennan's willingness to give false testimony under oath is breathtaking. Let's just savor that for a moment. The scope of Judge Brennan's willingness to give false testimony under oath is breathtaking. This is word for word, verbatim from the master's report. She testified falsely in depositions, in sworn answers to commission questions, and during the hearing as well. If this opinion should attempt to address each instance, or even most of them, it would be verbose in what has already been a lengthy process. Accordingly, we'll note instead that the examiner has painstakingly enumerated the instances of the respondent's false testimony in a document entitled Appendix 2, False Statements. In other words, she committed so much perjury, according to Master, that he didn't want to put it all in the report. He made a special appendix for it at the end. It's that big, and that it would tie the report up. It's a special appendix at the end, okay? And then finally, the thing I've got to point out to you, which to me is another great example of how abusive somebody can be in a position of power. Directing employees to perform the judge's personal business. Many complaints were made against Judge Brennan that she would ask people to do things for her that were not part of their job, such as making personal appointments for the judge, getting coffee next door, making travel arrangements, purchasing tickets online, and dropping off mail on the employee's way home. And the master points out, he goes, most of those are things that might be common in an office. My secretary used to get me lunch all the time. I often paid for it. And a lot of times I'd call her and say, hey, you want me to pick up lunch? We did that back and forth. It was an exchange. That's not that big of a deal. It goes beyond that. Jessica Sharp was a law clerk and magistrate who worked for Judge Brennan for 2.5 years. Among the things that Ms. Sharp did for the judge was to stain the deck at the judge's home over a period of 3 days, 2 of which passed while she's being paid by the county. There's no way you can say staining the judge's deck qualifies as court work. Beyond that, Ms. Sharp was sometimes required to leave the court to pay the judge's bills, and on another occasion when the judge was on vacation, she was required to go to the judge's home to get water samples, bring them to a testing site, also went to the judge's home to facilitate getting television programming, and was even directed by the judge to take her motor vehicle to a car dealership and wait for the performance of a list of repairs. So that's some crazy stuff. And there's also allegations of campaign activity being performed by her and her employees during office hours, in company time, and then misconduct during depositions. I won't go into all that. I'm hitting the highlights here, but this is already going to be the longest video I've ever made, and I don't want to bore you all to death. So the master released that report. Things look pretty bad for Judge Brennan right now. If anybody wants to bet me money, and of course I don't gamble, so we can't bet real money, but I'm pretty certain that I'll never have to appear in front of her again. But I have to tell you that, in all fairness, according to the Detroit News a couple weeks ago, Judge Teresa Brennan disagrees with the findings of the master, and she claims that the findings of the hearing were blatantly sexist, and a new hearing with a different judge should be ordered. Livingston County Judge Teresa Brennan on Monday asked the Judicial Tenure Commission to reject the report I just read to you, parts of. The commission serves as the state's watchdog over the judiciary, and she claims that sexism is irreparably tainting the findings. So I'm sure you heard a lot of the things in there were obviously sexist, right? So, in a separate criminal case, by the way, Brennan is also accused of perjury and destroying evidence in her divorce case. I mentioned that. State police say she lied during a deposition about erasing data from her iPhone shortly after her ex-husband filed for divorce. So, what we're talking about here, if you want to sum this all up, is there was an out-of-control judge on the bench in Brighton. Cases that were going to Brighton, you knew would wind up in front of her. And if you went in front of her, you were in for a beating. Didn't matter what you did. Didn't matter if you were right or wrong. She beat up everybody. She was out of her mind. Okay? I know attorneys who wouldn't take cases in her courtroom. I wouldn't take cases in her courtroom. Attorneys with 30, 40, 50 years of experience, or at least 40 years of experience and more, have said she's the worst judge they've ever been in front of. Have never been treated that badly before. She's currently facing criminal charges, and there are currently cases that went before her that may now have to be reversed or at least brought back down for new trials because of what she did. So, just in case I did not make myself crystal clear on this, Livingston County Judge Teresa Brennan is, without question, the worst judge I've ever been in front of. And I believe that that is not just subjectively true. I believe that is objectively, provably true. But the good news is that the court system and the various processes that come into play when judges get in trouble will be the ones who will put the final exclamation point at the end of that. So that, again, is the story of Judge Teresa Brennan. And I will update you as this story progresses. But I thought you should know about it because people often ask me, they say, Steve, who's the worst judge you've ever been in front of? Well, that's it. Judge Teresa Brennan. Questions or comments? Fire them away. Otherwise, thanks for hanging in there. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.